Give me some of your thoughts on the no-fly zone and nuclear war with Russia.
I mean, is my voice okay?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. What I was gonna say is, when we start talking about a no-fly zone, before we even get off into that, we are now imposing, basically some sort of our own will on another country's airspace.
Hmm.
And I think that, when you're talking from, sort of like this type of perspective, we have to understand that what gave us the right to do that.
Hmm.
Like, we don't have the right to impose the no-fly zone on another country, civil war. They're having a civil war. Well, really, it's not necessarily a civil war. It's armed rebels rebelling against the government that was democratically elected. So we're just talking about the no-fly zone is just the wrong place to be. Like, again, I wouldn't even accept that frame. I would say that there's a conflict going on in Syria, and we should be focusing on cutting off the arms first off, figuring out where the funding for the rebels is coming from, and trying to address that first before we try to implement some sort of no-fly zone. Because I believe if we had done that, the rebels would have probably lost to the government, and this would already be resolved.
Okay, so then if that's the frame that you were going to ask that in, and I have a feeling we're probably going to jump off here and talk about this for a while. If that's the frame that you're going to accept, one, you cutting off the supply of arms. If we're talking about cutting off the American supply of arms, cool, we can do that. That doesn't stop the supply of arms from anywhere else. And for
Well, a
America
lot of
to
those
cut,
countries in that region are our allies, and they do have control over the supply of arms to that region, and we can actually
no,
enforce
exactly, yeah, no, we
some
can
some some
enforce.
actual tight standards
Oh,
on
hang
those
on.
allies that depend on us so heavily.
Right, we can stop the American flow of arms into those regions. No questions asked. Done. Let's do that. We should have done that. I don't think anybody can question that. That's something that we are complicit in the bloodshed. So let's cut off those arms. But that doesn't stop the conflict because those arms are going to be supplied from somewhere else. There are nations in line to supply those guns. So that isn't an answer to Syria.
Well,
But I think
again,
what
are
I'm
we
asking, what
getting?
I'm hearing you say though, is that that you're not worried about finding an answer for Syria because that's not our problem.
No, what I'm saying is a no-fly zone or no-fly zone shouldn't be what we're talking about. The solutions to this aren't going to be from armed conflict. To be honest with you, the fact that that regime is still standing and still has the support of a majority of the populace is a testament that perhaps armed or regime change shouldn't be the strategy in Syria at all. That's my frame.
He actually has the support of about 2 million people. Out of, I believe there's about 11 million people left. I mean, he doesn't have the support of the majority. I think I have the number wrong. It's not 11 million people that left. 11 million people who left the nation, right? So he doesn't have the majority support
Well,
of his
again,
own people.
just because people left the nation does not mean they may or may not support the government there. That means that their violence is so bad they can't physically or safely stay.
Right,
But
but
that's not
it's just not
necessarily their
accurate.
fault, right?
It's not. I mean, we're the polling that says he has the majority support
Well, I
of the
mean,
people.
he was democratically elected. That is a majority. That's a legitimate government.
He was democratically elected before the Civil War. Civil War broke out, challenging his legitimacy. So there, regardless. All right. So I don't have the data to say that he's supported by the majority. I just because I can't just let that stand unless I actually see some data on that. But he
Okay.
was elected, right? So he was elected. They're in a civil war. If we cut off our supply of arms, that doesn't stop the civil war. That doesn't prevent the stop the bloodshed.
Well,
So are
if
we?
if 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 we're talking about stopping a conflict in a country, where are the rebels getting their arms from? Those are American arms, and they're really people that we armed.
Mhm.
This is part of the thing that we started, and it would have to be solved by first off stopping the flow of arms, coordinating with a coalition to try to stop the flow of arms into the country, and
Again,
probably abandoning the strategy of regime change, which we still have yet to do. We're still
again,
talking about
again,
Assad as if he's some sort of dictator.
again, let's be sure. Now, you said something pretty heavy in there. You said America started this. America did not start the Civil War, unless you're going to say covertly with the CIA. America started the Civil War. There is. I mean, are you asserting that America started the
What I'm
Civil War
saying
in Syria?
is we armed sectarian groups, multitudes of them in our adventures in that region, and they were able to amass those arms and amass resources and then use that.
So the chicken, but we armed them after We armed them after the war, after the rebellion. I
We've
can
been
call it a
arming,
war, but after the
we've been
rebellion.
arming groups in that region for over 30
Yeah,
years.
yeah, we've been
Like,
armed. Yeah,
I mean,
but
that's where the issue really comes from. And I
let's
think that
not.
the first thing you have to do is stop that.
Well, hang on. I mean, let's not confuse the two, right? Let's not confuse the two, because arming them for 30 years, they're not picking up arms from 30 years ago. They're picking up arms that they just got delivered probably last month, right?
What I'm saying is the strategy has to come to an end, and we've been doing it for a very long time.
Exactly, but here's what I'm saying. We're conflating a couple of things. We're saying that the people of Syria who are rebelling against Assad, we're conflating that
really
with
the Syrian people that are rebelling against.
So that's exactly what I'm trying to unearth here. You're saying that the people of Syria are not really rebelling against Assad, and that it's America wanting a regime change, when in fact it was actually a rebellion that was connected to this to the Arab Spring, and that actually that Assad came down on them brutally, right? So it's not as though he is clean in this. The people rebelled as a result of the Arab Spring, and he cracked down even to the extent of chemical weapons. So as a community, as an international community, are we simply going to say, we don't have anything to do with that? That's not our sovereign nation. Go ahead, Brandon. What do you think? Yeah.
There are a lot of clauses for the Syrian civil war. One of them being the way in which the Middle East was carved up after World War II, that had no sort of regard for the traditional land of ethnic groups, all the way up and through the past 10 years, which was a record drought for the area. So when we're talking about the cause of the Syrian civil war, it's very complicated. Whether or not they would have the munitions to engage in a war at the scale with the Syrian government is definitely a result of Western influence in the area. But I think largely we have to talk about how do we stop this conflict, and how do we prevent this conflict, and not only this conflict, but the oppression of ethnic groups within the area by these regimes, whether they be, quote unquote, democratic elected or just authoritarian. And that comes down to a whole scale reorganizing of the Middle East. The same problem that we see in Turkey and in Iraq and in Levant in general is the problem we're seeing in Syria, along with climate change. So like at a certain point, we have to start working through the sins of the past here, start unraveling everything we've done over the past, not just 30 years with arming them, but 70 years in just the way we organize these countries.
I agree. I agree that we can trace the roots of the problem back to after the war, post World War II. However, I disagree that we can successfully solve what's happening in Syria right now by trying to solve the entire problem of the Middle East. I mean, it's like we're trying to build Rome before we fix a bridge, right? And not to belittle the situation in Syria, but it really is, we cannot wait on solving the problem in the Middle East, whoever caused it, to address the issue of what's happening in Syria. And what I guess I'm hearing, and this is not, I'm not trying to belittle anyone's take on this. I really wish Jill Stein would go ahead and just say this, right? Just come out and say, we shouldn't be involved. Let's leave it alone, and then discuss the ramifications of what we're saying. Because if we're saying we're just going to stop the American arms flow there, and we're going to walk away and let them solve it themselves, we're really saying we are just going to stop our arms, but we're not going to stop other arms from getting there, and we're going to sit by while the war continues. That's what we're saying, and that's the ramifications. But let's just say that instead of kind of equivocating around the issue and trying to make it, such a big problem when it is we're trying to expand the problem to be bigger by going all the way back to how we carved up the Middle East. I get that. We are complicit in that way. But none of that addresses how we're going to fix Syria, the real crisis that if it continues at this rate, 50,000 people a year getting killed, it's going to be a lot more people dead before we solve the sins of the past.
Well, here's what I would say. It's hard to assuage those two things, I would imagine, if you're Jill Stein. How do you put forth a humanitarian agenda that also involves something that's going to involve military force? Because let's talk really short term, which is stopping the violence in Syria, stopping the Syrian civil war, forgetting about the past, forgetting about sort of like these more complex issues that would lead to more civil wars, but just this particular conflict. Military intervention.
Oh man,
without,
we lost.
without drone.
Start that sentence again, because we lost the first half of your new sentence.
I don't see a way to do that without military intervention. I don't see a way to do that without drones. I don't see a way to do that without feet on the ground. I don't think that anyone would see a way. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, how do we stop this war in Syria if we agree that's our goal? You know,
right?
Stop this conflict without actually putting boots on the ground, without actually using drone strikes. And how, if you're Jill Stein, how do you assuage that with your sort of wholesale stance that war is bad?
Right. You can't because you can't without saying this, that basically what President Obama is doing is probably the best out of all the bad methods of getting something done, right? Or not even getting in something. What he's doing is the best, worst solution. Because anything else, it will involve troops. It will involve boots on the ground. It will involve no-fly zones. That's the only way you're going to end that conflict. Now, if you are saying that we shouldn't be involved in or worried about ending that conflict, you have to confess that you're ignoring the humanitarian crisis that is a direct extension of that conflict. And nobody really is going to discuss that. They just want to point out the fact that Hillary Clinton's no-fly zones will cause World War III. And that's the oversimplification that really drives me batty with a lot of people on the left, because you're not advancing the conversation. You're oversimplifying the conversation and trying to politicize it for your own personal benefit, your own campaign's benefit.
Well, see here, hold on, Ben. I think that to say that the conflict is just going to rage on unending without some sort of U.S. intervention is kind of foolhardy too. Isn't that kind of oversimplifying it?
No, somebody has to intervene.
Somebody has to do something.
Somebody, because they're at a stalemate.
That's not oversimplifying.
That's really not oversimplifying it, because it has drug along. It's drug along for 5 years. It has drug along for 5 years, and even after Russia and Iran has gotten on the side of the regime.
Had several ceasefires, but what happened during those ceasefires when they were coming to the table and actually going to have a resolution? What happened? The United States used that as an effort to go ahead and rearm and rebomb, and they broke the ceasefires, both of them.
Both sides did.
No. Those were the U.S. Both times the U.S. broke those.
All right. Let's double.
You won't hear that reported here in the United States, but both sides of the United States undermined both.
That's exactly
both
yeah. Okay. Go, and what's your source on that?
That is straight from I don't know. I'll pull it up and I'll send it to you. And
okay.
All right.
All right. Send that to me.
The United States undermined both of those.
Now, I wouldn't doubt it. I'm not going to say I'm going to doubt it. But what I am saying is that where it stands right now today, Syria does not get solved without someone tipping the balance of power in that fight.
I'm going to fully disagree with you. I think cutting off the flow of arms does tip the power in favor of the government that's already there, that's democratically elected, and that's what we should be doing.
You really just said what I said, right? Without somebody tipping the balance of power.
No, but stopping the flow of arms doesn't involve military involvement. You can do that without military involvement in that region. But you said without somebody tipping the scales with military involvement.
No, I said somebody tips the balance of power. Somebody tips the balance of power.
You said there is no solution to this without military involvement.
There is. Listen, Assad. Let's be clear, right? Assad has already killed hundreds of thousands of his people with chemical weapons. Hang on. Let me finish this. Let me finish this. Hundreds of thousands of people that he's killed. Hang on. And you can ask it as soon as I finish this sentence.
Go ahead.
Hundreds of thousands of people he has already killed, many of which he killed with chemical weapons. We are saying that you are saying that you would rather see the rebellion against that type of leadership not have the support of the international community or America, whoever you want to blame it on, in the hopes of ending it in favor of the government.
What I'm saying,
that's what you're saying.
No. What I'm saying is that if the United States government were ever to face an armed rebellion and the government were to start killing those people rebelling, would it be upon France or Germany or all these people to come in and intervene on behalf of those people? That's not how that works.
If they so choose to, listen, sovereignty has always, wait a minute. Let's be clear. Let's be clear about sovereignty. Sovereignty, hang on. I'm going to answer your question. Sovereignty is only something that we recognize, right? A state has to recognize another state's sovereignty. Sovereignty has always been broken. America has broken sovereignty. Nations across, the Middle Middle East, they've broken sovereignty across each other's borders. So it's not a matter of do they have permission. There's nobody in the there's nobody in the international community who's going to be there to say, "Oop, you broke the rules of the international community, so we're going to spank your hands." There's nothing to stop France or England or anyone else for that matter from getting involved with an American civil war.
It comes down to a philosophical
historically,
question: is it right?
Is it right? Is it right? Is it right to leave? If you want to ask that question, is it right to leave the people of Syria at the mercy of Assad?
Is that really what the United States is doing? When the United States gets involved in that conflict and makes it worse, are we really helping those people?
Are we getting what economic benefit do we get? What global benefit do we get from intervening in Syria? Because if there was an economic benefit, this would have been solved already. You do realize if there was money on the table, if there was some expansion of America. Hang on. Let me finish my thought.
That's money made by somebody.
Let me finish.
Somewhere off the floor
let me finish my thought. Let me finish my thought. If there was
your question, though.
No, you didn't, because I'm saying if there was economic, Nick, hold on. This is the Benjamin Dixon Show. All right. So hold your thought and answer my question now. If there was an economic benefit for somebody, for the United States to overthrow Assad and bring this to an end, this would have been stopped when Obama drew the red line in the first place. Is there anyone who's questioning that? If there was some oil benefit, something in our vital national interest, we would have overthrown Assad, no questions asked. And what I'm saying is the reason we have not gone in to do the quote unquote humanitarian thing is because there is no global geopolitical or economic benefit to do so, to constitute that. Because if it was, we'd be in there. What would stop us from going to get the money or the oil or whatever it is that would have been in our interest to go over there? Nothing.
So I'm gonna answer the first question, and I'm going to answer the second question. Sometimes there is an economic benefit. It's just not easily identifiable. In the United States, military spending is a huge part of our economy, and armed conflict is what fuels the armed trade. People make tons of money off of death and chaos. Sometimes just sowing death and chaos and conflict is profitable.
So why haven't we overthrown Assad?
Perhaps that because our populace is actually awake and actually has popular resistance to all-out war, the government can't just do things willy-nilly all the time. Perhaps they have to be tactful in certain things. Now, to say that we would have overthrown him, maybe chaos and the death would continue on without him being overthrown, and maybe that's profitable in itself. There's nothing to say that you have to overthrow somebody just to sell bullets and bombs. You can do that without overthrowing somebody, and that's what they're doing right now. Each of those drone strikes is hundreds of thousands of dollars.
If there was an economic benefit for overthrow, not conflict. There's always an economic benefit for conflict. I'm saying if there was an economic benefit to overthrowing Assad, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because we would have done it because we have set that precedent through American history. We will ignore the general consent of the population and get involved in a conflict because there is something we deem to be a national vital interest or some huge economic benefit for us to do regime change. We have not done so. The
public discourse is mostly kabuki theater. We'll never know what the real intent and interests are until years after.
Brandon, go ahead and get in this. Brandon, go ahead.
Well, what I would say is, I largely agree with Nick. I think there is an actual economic benefit in keeping arms going in and out of Syria and keeping the conflict going on. But just to transition from that particular topic, I hate to sound like a non-interventionist, but when does it end? If we're not willing to start laying the foundations for a Middle East that is without these conditions that just create civil war and create conflict, when do we stop engaging in it? When do we stop allowing the conditions to exist for these constant conflicts? And I've yet to hear any kind of discourse on that. Any kind of, well, yes, let's stop the flow of arms. Let's engage in some sort of international socialist policy that builds up these regions so we don't have to be constantly putting out fires or not putting out fires or having to cajole ourselves into the situation. And also, I would question the motives for getting involved in Syria. Why are we there? Does everyone believe it's a humanitarian reason, or do we just have a very kinetic foreign policy as it comes to the military? Do we just need to have our military doing something? Because if they're not doing something, it becomes hard to justify that 55% of the budget that's spent on military spending. So I guess I fall we have something, but we also can't ignore the fact that these conflicts and keeping the conditions there that create these conflicts is enriching a part of our population. Like it just is. It's enriching it.
All right, let's be sure, because I'm not going to let you guys conflate these two things. What you guys are conflating is that, well, actually, you just conflated a whole nother thing there with why are we there, right? We are there in not nearly in a role where someone is going to get this tremendous economic benefit, right? Halliburton is not getting a lot of money off the 6,000 troops, the 5,600 troops that we have there, right? But people are getting a lot of money off the arms sales, right? So there's no disagreement about the economic benefit of the arms sales that are going on. Two things here. You guys are making the assumption that if the Americans stop selling arms, that arms would not make it into that region. And that's incorrect. That's like supply meets demand. There's going to be a demand for arms. If Americans don't supply it, which we shouldn't, I agree with you, but that doesn't constitute the end of a conflict just because America withdraw their arms. The Chinese will be more than happy to sell arms there. The Russians will be more than happy to sell arms there.
Will be selling arms to people against the government that they're actually providing arms to.
America has been selling arms on both sides of the equation for years. Yes, Russia would do the same exact thing. And if Russia doesn't do it, hang on. If Russia doesn't do it, okay, if Russia doesn't do it, do you honestly believe where in this globe there is a demand for weapons that somebody is not going to fill that demand? And the only way for that demand not to be filled is if there is an embargo and people stop, like use force. Hang on, to use force, to use military force to stop arms from going into a region. Otherwise, somebody else is going to supply the arms. So this general statement that people say, including Jill Stein, that all we have to do is cut off the supply of arms. What are we saying? Are we saying America cut off the supply of arms? That's the right thing to do. That's the moral thing to do. But that does not stop the flow of arms into that region from other nations.
My position wasn't that we have to just stop the flow of arms. I don't think, especially not from just America. My position was that we need to, as part of a larger bucket of solutions, stop the flow of arms and also engage in a more infrastructural program of building up these countries and addressing the reasons for why these conflicts exist. I was willing to concede the fact that with this particular flare up in Syria, it's too late to do that. It's too late to engage in building schools and engage in like sort of fixing irrigation system. It's too late for that. We that situation has already started. We have to handle that in the way that is that minimizes the most lives. Lost. But I'm unwilling to engage in that kind of conversation without also engaging in a solution that addresses the material conditions of these countries that continue to fuel these conflicts. Because my point is that ultimately there is no money to be made in addressing these structural issues for the military-industrial complex. So we will never see them addressed. And so, yes, we have to stop the arms going in, but guns don't make a war like by themselves. Guns, I hate to say it, but guns don't shoot people. Guns don't start a civil war.
You sounded like you're true. That's absolutely true.
Drought starts a civil war. Apparently, drought starts a civil war, and the refusal of Western countries to bring water and basic necessities to Syria starts a civil war. Along with a host of other issues. So it's too late for Syria. It doesn't have to be too late for Iraq. It doesn't have to be too late for any of these other countries. But we have to actually start engaging in all aspects of these conversations and not just getting bogged down with people are dying. Let's just do something, because it's the old saying. You shouldn't confuse movement with progress. You shouldn't confuse kineticism, with doing something is often not necessarily the right thing. Sometimes doing nothing is the right thing. Sometimes you have to really lay out a 10-year plan. What happens when this war's over? What do we do with Assad? Should Assad still be in power? How do we, all these questions have to be addressed from the get-go for me to sign off on any program. I'm sorry.
And what I was also going to say is, when I say cut off the flow of arms, I'm not saying cut off only American arms. There are countries in that region that are allied with us and would work with us to make sure the flow of arms don't get there. And you can do that. That is something, if you are really concerted to do that, you can do that. And without the flow of arms going into that country, odds are the rebels will lose to the government that's already there. It's not just going to rage on unending forever. They'll lose to the government that's already there, sue for peace, and come to some kind of agreement.
Okay, and
the conflict can finally come to an end.
Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, and these are the conversations. Number one, if we're still talking about the debate, they will never get into a substantive conversation about Syria in this fashion on any level, on any debate, even if it's like a town hall sit down for 3 hours. They won't, right? So, but just to be sure, that's what I said at the beginning of this conversation. But I want people to be clear on what that actually means. And this is what nobody is really going to own up to. Nobody is going to own up to what you just said, Nick, which actually equates to leaving the Syrian people who rebelled against a leader that they no longer recognize a legitimate authority. They rebelled against him, leaving those people at the mercy of that man who has already killed hundreds of thousands of his own people. Now, unless we own up to that, then we're not being genuine about this solution of just walking away from the region and letting it fix itself.
I'm unwilling to do that. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, again, that's a democratically elected leader. And ultimately, when people rise up and rebel and they lose, that's just what happens. Like, that's what would happen here. If you rose up in the streets, the American government would crush you. And there would be no other countries coming to your aid talking about, well, they rebelled, so now you need to, make sure that they win and whatever else. You're going to get whatever you get. That's what it is. And it's not always right.
The only reason
it doesn't always work out the right way. Mm-hmm. But what I will say is that they fought long enough. It has gone on long enough that they actually can win concessions. In fact, the government, before the rebellion even began, was already beginning to give them concessions. They have stuff in Syria. Well, they had, before it's a war-torn region. They had stuff in Syria we don't even have here in the United States. They had public colleges and universities. They had universal health care.
So they should have just been happy, huh?
No, what I'm saying is that the government actually was responsive to the needs of the people. Not all of their needs, but no government is. It was doing some things, and it was moving in a direction that was kind of, sort of towards some kind of moderation. But I hate to use that word moderate, because when the United States, when we use the word moderate, we really just mean people that are, kind of going along with the United States policy, whatever that may mean. So I don't want to use that in that context. I want to use like moderate as in giving concessions to people that ask for stuff.
So just to be sure, and we'll move on to another topic so we don't belabor this long, but I have to be clear on this. We are saying that we just don't get involved no matter what. It's someone else's sovereignty, so we just don't get involved.
What I am saying is, first off, you have to ask the question, is it right for you to get involved?
I mean, that's the wrong question, though.
No, it's the correct answer. It is the correct question you asked. Now, if you get past that part,
it's the wrong question.
Okay, now with the answer that you've already have inside your mind for whether or not it's right or wrong, you say, okay, what can I do? In the face of that answer I had to the first question, what would I do in such a situation? What caused the situation? What are the possible solutions? What are the possible outcomes? I'm saying, to be honest with you, the best solution in this one is the one I've already outlined. And then once you start those steps, you kind of see where things are going and you readjust from there depending on the results that outcome brings.
Okay, so I'll explain why it's the wrong question. And then I'll answer something, or actually I'll pose something to you. It's the wrong question because in international relations, there is no real law that constrains people, period. Sovereignty is only relevant.
I didn't ask about the law, though. I asked a moral question to you.
You can't make it a moral question because the moral question becomes, do we leave these people at the mercy of a brutal leader, right?
But when you ask that question, it's a moral question.
Right. No, I'm saying that's exactly why I said we can't ask it as a moral question. We have to ask it as a question of international law. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong because the international community is the Wild West. The only reason somebody would not get involved in today's America, an American Civil War in the 21st century, is because they couldn't F with America. They don't have the strength to stop America. That's it. That's the only people. you look through a lot of the decisions by the UN. The only people who recognize the resolutions by the UN are countries who are not big enough to say we can do whatever the hell we want to do. But everybody else who's big enough and strong enough militarily to say they could do whatever the hell they want to do, they do it. China, Russia, the United States. We will ignore international norms and laws at will whenever it benefits us. So the question of whether or not it's right or wrong is not the right question to ask, because in the international community, it's whatever you're strong enough to get away with. And now once you have that type of strength, you do ask the question, should we get involved in this kind of quote unquote humanitarian crisis, or whatever you want to call it, whatever
it's
the
not
reason.
A humanitarian crisis, though. That's really not what we're interested in. Just as you said, it's the wild, wild west, and you can do whatever you want. People don't do stuff without some sort of interest. There's no interest there, right?
And I would argue that's why we just leave.
Right?
That's why we keep letting it linger. That's why we are standing on the sidelines now.
I don't base. If you ask me, if I were in control, what would I do? And so I would always ask, what is right? What do I feel is the right thing to do? And I can tell you right now, when you have a sovereign country with a democratically elected president, if people rebel and they lose, they just lost. That's just what it is.
And you're answering that as a moral question. That's your moral answer.
Yes, because and here's why it's my moral answer. Because once you have a democracy, you can battle in the marketplace of ideas, and you can win that way. And they have already won concessions that way in the past. There's no reason to take up arms against the government.
Now, you do know where this is logically going, right? Just so you know, and we'll change the subject. You can get the last word on it, but logically, it's going here. Should we? Hitler was democratically elected, so
he was.
So we just, hey, there's nothing we should do about it.
Well, actually, no. When he was democratically elected, that was fine. The problem was when he engaged in war and invaded other countries. That was the problem. It wasn't the problem that he was elected. That's not a problem. In Poland, they have a fascist as elected as their leader. It's not a problem, because he's not invading other countries.
Okay. So in terms of the humanitarian crisis that existed during World War II, we don't get involved because of that.
Well, no. World War II is a special case, and the reason why I would say that is, again, he invaded other countries. Are you saying if he started exterminating people in his own borders, would we have still gotten involved? I don't think largely Europe gave a crap. They didn't do anything until he actually began.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm not asking you from a historical perspective. I'm taking your argument to the logical extreme. You made the moral case that we should not get involved in a sovereign nation's actions, right? So I'm asking you, should we not have gotten involved in not us, not past? Would you stand by in that kind of instance and say that's happening within their sovereign borders?
Okay, so the question is, would I not get involved? No, I would not get involved. Now, but before that, the answer, though, and I use a double negative there.
Yeah, I saw you.
I would not stay out of the conflict. However, I would not actually use military as my solution. Like, the first thing I would do is I would make it easy, if I could, for the people that do escape to be, protected and whatnot. Okay. But inside of the borders, I wouldn't actually move in there and start doing stuff without some sort of international ruling, a coalition bound by international law to move forward with any type of real action. And to be sure, there is no such thing as international law other than what we decide to recognize. So some sort of coalition agreement by the international community, not necessarily bound by international law, but some sort of coalition agreement with the international community to move in, not some kind of unilateral move. So here's why this is worthwhile discussing, folks. And we went. I knew as soon as we touched it, we were going to go on a long sidebar. Here's why it's worth discussing, because and Nick, I'm not throwing this at you as an insult, but this is really quite literally Donald Trump's argument on foreign policy. Right? He's making the case. On Syria, he's making the case. He won't say it. He won't say that to just leave Assad in power. Actually, he said it tonight. Tonight he said it. He said it a couple of times where he's alluded to that we should not be involved. He didn't say it. He shouldn't. That's exactly what I was saying, Nick. Jesus, that's what I just said. God damn. I'm sorry. When I debate, I'm aggressive. See, they couldn't have me on that stage. But you're so aggressive. You're not even hearing straight. I just said that he won't cop to it.
He won't cop to it himself because he can't bring himself to actually say it because he knows how politically poisonous it is. But it's just like Jill Stein. She will not bring herself to say it. You will, but they won't. The bottom line is your answer to ending in Donald Trump's answer and Jill Stein's answer to ending conflict in Syria is to let the rebels lose and let Assad stay in power, no matter how brutally he beat down his own rebellion, because this is happening in his nation. They will not say it. You said it, but that's most certainly what the end result of both Donald Trump and Jill Stein's foreign policy in Syria would lead to.
Well, I have to interject.
Donald Trump alluded to that.
I have to interject. This is not a one-to-one comparison to the World War II, or not World War II, but Hitler and the Nazi state, because there is a big difference between demonizing a subsection of your population who's largely doing nothing and deciding to exterminate them, and putting down an armed rebellion. I'm not saying I would allow either to occur in any way, but there is a bit of a difference there.
Yeah, no, of course. It's not apples to apples, clearly, but at the logical extreme, the simplified argument is to allow what happens in a sovereign nation's borders happen. That's without intervention.
See, I don't agree with that idea in general, not because of the international law or whatever, because that's not, again, like you said, that's not a real thing, but because of the specificity of the Middle East and the way the Middle East was formed and how those nations got their borders. So Europe is a special case because European borders were formed the same way. Oh, I mean, well, not the same way, but the way European borders were formed. The nation came first. Nation came first in the state. But in these cases, it went the other way around, in which we just carved up the region. So we do bear a greater responsibility to the Middle East, to South America, to Africa than we do to Europe in those situations, because they are not responsible for the ethnic conflicts that they have within their borders to the same degree.
When you brought this back up, I was gonna let this one slide, but you brought it back up. You and I'm sure you both do realize you absolutely cannot go back and undo what we did after World War II without the most perverse example of interventionism, without going in and just completely wreaking havoc using force and diplomacy. I mean, you can't fix that problem without really making a bigger problem in terms of intervening.
I mean, you can't fix that problem without making a bigger problem in terms of intervening. And I would not know how you would even begin to do this, but I would say is that we're not in a position in the Middle East where things are just hunky-dory and things seem like they're going great. And if we just, leave it the way it is, it's going to get better. We do need to start coming up with some kind of plan to make sure that these ethnic conflicts do not keep occurring. I don't think that's a controversial statement. I think that is. But
from a leftist non-interventionist perspective, it is, because a non-interventionist is saying, just walk away. We've done enough damage. Just walk away. And to actually try to fix the problem means we don't walk away. We actually get our hands in even deeper.
I mean, ultimately, I don't try to assuage everything, my prescriptions for the world with any particular ideology. I do what I want to do, and I do what I want to do. And I call it socialism.
Amen.
It's like that's what it is. It's the same way. So my point is that it's like we seem to be trying to avoid the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
These hard solutions, these hard multi-year, these hard 30, 40-year big projects in order to engage in putting out these multiple 5-year fires. And my point is, why not just start creating the material conditions in these countries so we don't have to keep worrying about these little issues. We don't have to keep worrying about civil war, uprising, the rise and fall of democratically elected leaders, female gender mutilation, all of these issues that people claim to care about. People claim to actually want to stop. How about we actually tackle the structural issues? But I can understand why we don't want to do that, because we can't even do that here.
Right.
We can't even solve the structural issues in America.
Yeah.
So in order to try to engage with that stuff overseas would involve having to look at ourselves. So we can't do that.
Man,
so that's my larger point.
Brandon, you're a straight up central planner, aren't you?
Yeah. This whole thing, it's like to actually engage with what's going on in the Middle East is not simply to engage with the history of America or the history of Europe or history of colonization. It's to engage with the reality of America today, that we just cannot seem to tackle structural issues.
Yeah.
For either because of economic reasons, because of cultural reasons, because of social reasons, whatever reason why. So my prescription for the Middle East is my same prescription for America. Ultimately, like stop dealing with the excesses of the system and start dealing with the system itself.
Well,
go ahead.
I want to jump in there for a second because again, Ben, you know, if you're not an advocate for military intervention, that doesn't mean you're saying just walk away. It really means explore other avenues for trying to help the situation. And I think that up until now, we just haven't done that. That's just not what's been done. And even you're kind of internalizing that when you're saying the only way to solve this is more military intervention. The only way to solve this is to get deeper in there, to get dirty. You know.
Hello. I mean, let's be clear. Let's be clear. Like there's intervention and then there's military intervention. You frame this your last statement as military intervention when we've been discussing intervention in general. But specifically, any type of intervention in that region.
I never advocated for walking away. But you said you basically gave a binary. You're saying interventionists don't want to. They either want to walk away or they want to whatever else. And I was like, well, it's not a binary thing. There's intervention that's not military. That's all I was saying.
Yeah, but there's no intervention. There's no interventionist fix.
Setting up a peace talk is intervention.
But there's no. But there's no fix in that region to undo the level of FUBAR that we created post World War II that does not involve every type of intervention. Let's just be clear. I mean, as much as we did a disservice to that region by carving it up the way we saw fit, a lot of nations recognize their borders now, and there's no fixing their borders without. I mean, you're not just talking about having a peace talk to undo the borders that we did post World War II.
Again, I'm not actually on board with trying to recarve the borders. What I'm trying to do is do something a little bit different. Is okay, facts on the ground. We can't fix that. How do we make this work without military intervention? And I think it's possible if done correctly and proceeded with the correct tact and done in line, you know, with coalitions of people working together to get that to happen. That is something that is definitely possible, and it's not just a pipe dream, and it doesn't always involve military intervention.
Right, and I'm totally cool. I'm totally cool with that. All I'm saying is most people will not cop to what the ramifications of non-intervention, particularly in Syria, actually means. They will not do it. You've done it tonight, okay. So I'll give you credit for that.
Actually, I don't think I outlined non-intervention. I think I outlined intervention, but not military intervention.
Whatever the case, your solution adds up to returning the rebellion underneath the control of Assad and everything that means for those people and for the people he's already killed. That's your solution. So I just and I'm not saying your solution is wrong, even though I disagree with it. I'm not saying it's wrong. What I'm saying is Jill Stein nor Donald Trump will cop to the reality that they're saying, let the rebellion, let the rebellions,
it's not just those two.
Let the rebels. No, well, nobody else is actually offering that as a solution besides, I mean, maybe Gary Johnson. I don't know what the hell Gary Johnson's going to do in Syria. He doesn't even know what the hell Aleppo is. But neither one of them are going to cop to what that actually translates. They're going to say dry up the guns, but they're not going to say this is going to tip the balance of power in favor of the Assad regime, and the Assad regime is going to subjugate the rebellion and put things back. And that's how you stop the bloodshed. They're not going to say that. And I think it's very disingenuous for them not to say that, because it does not allow us to actually flesh out what that means and our responsibility, if any, to people who rebel against their nation for humanitarian, whatever reason they did it. All right, let's move on because it's almost midnight.